Welcome to Evangelicalish, where we discuss the good, the bad, and the ugly of the American evangelical church, deconstruction, faith, and God's love through it all. Join us for these episodes live on our Evangelicalish YouTube page on Wednesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 Central, and 6 o'clock Pacific. Let's journey together. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Evangelicalish. I'm April.
I'm Jeremy.
I'm Paul.
And we've got a full crew tonight. The whole team is here. We're glad to have Paul back. Before we get started and jump into the episode, just want to remind everyone, wherever you're listening to a podcast, if you could give us 5 stars, leave us a review. If you want to send comments in or questions, you can email us. We have an email. It's evangelicalish@gmail.com. And we also have a Facebook group that's just called Evangelicalish Podcast Group, and it's private, and it's been a really cool. It's just been cool to see the community that's been growing there and the conversations that are having in a safe place. So
yeah.
But if you do try to join, please answer the questions, because I won't let you in unless you answer the questions, because I just want to make sure that it will stay a safe place.
We need to make the questions tougher, I think.
I know. I made them real easy just on a whim. And it's just like, how'd you hear about us? Do you promise to behave? Is basically, those are the 2 questions. They're not hard. So yeah, we're not asking for your social security number or anything like that.
Just to exegete numerical law, but that's fine. You know, nothing too tough.
Yeah. Yeah, just some quiz from high school too.
Something, reformed Theo Bro kind of, entrance exam.
Yeah, just to like weed out the reformed people trying to come in.
What's your theology on hell?
Yeah, theology on hell.
Honestly, to keep it safe, we just ask who's to blame for the gas prices.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty good. What a great idea. Because then that just is like,
or what's your definition of a woman?
Oh, yeah. Or even better yet, easier than all of that, and actually productive in the end. What are your pronouns?
Oh, that's true.
And then put in an option of, I don't believe in that or something like that.
Like,
and everybody
my pronoun
who
is
that,
patriot.
My pronoun is patriot. Yeah, I saw a pastor here in Oklahoma who's he's had some legal issues because of some threats he made against some doctors and nurses here in Oklahoma because of a member of his went into the hospital with COVID, and it was this whole he's anti-vax, anti-mask, whatever, and he posted on Facebook the other day. Somebody sent it to me. It said, "You want to know how to defeat the godless commies? Spend an hour in your Bible every morning."
Oh my gosh.
I've been told to do quiet times a lot of different ways, but like being encouraged to do my quiet time to defeat the godless commies is like a whole nother
godless
level.
Commies.
Yeah.
Well, that's why Jesus came, right? It wasn't to defeat Satan. It was to defeat the godless commies.
Yeah.
Thou shalt be a good American.
Yeah. I will say, on a lighter note, before we get off into this, I did a wedding this weekend, and I got like the best wedding gift. I got some whiskey.
Ooh.
With a glass.
It says Jeremy. At first glance, I just saw the J and the E and what looked like an S. I thought it said Jesus.
No, Jeremy, and then it says that I'm the officiant, and then it gave the date of the wedding.
That is a cool gift.
So anyway, so tonight's Evangelicalish is going to be extra fun for me.
So you're going to be a little bit loose tonight.
Yeah, it's peanut butter whiskey, which I haven't tried, but it smells like straight peanut butter. I mean, just stress. Like if you opened a can of, Jif or whatever, like it's right there. Wow.
I'm impressed.
It's a good smell.
So Evangelicalish after dark in about an hour. Jeremy.
Oh, no. We'll just see how quick we can get through some of this bottle, and we may be after dark in about 20 minutes.
Ooh, all right.
Yeah, here
challenge
we go.
Accepted. Yeah.
All right. Challenge accepted. Yeah.
Shooter, man. Just.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I don't know, man. I don't know. Anyway. All right. So
yeah. Well, so moving into our first topic, if you guys watched the promo from earlier that Paul did, or if you just listened to our show last week, you know that Paul was out dealing with some family issues that we didn't really talk about, but it actually turned out that his dad passed away. Was it last Thursday?
Last Thursday, yeah.
Yeah, so not even a full week. And this was Paul's idea, because I know grief can be very complicated and raw, and there's lots of emotions, but Paul made a TikTok about it and got some really good feedback and response from that. So we kind of all agreed that this could be helpful, just talking about the grief when it is raw, because we've all experienced grief in some way. And I know, Paul, that you had mentioned in your video that your grief is kind of complicated. So do you want to just jump in and kind of give us a little bit of your process? And we are sorry for your loss.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah. And I see people doing that in the comments, and I appreciate all of that and all that love. And yeah, complicated is a really good word. And I think human beings are complicated. And so I've been thinking a lot about this. My father went in the hospital. The doctors were kind of saying he's not coming out. Went in with COVID, contracted pneumonia, and passed away. And so I've had some days to think about this as I was leading up to it. And I thought, well, am I just going to go dark for a while, kind of process it through, or do I process it real time and publicly and kind of let it go and see what happens and see if that's just helpful for people. And so I did that first video of, just talking about how the relationship was complex with my father. He had some pretty significant, I believe, mental health issues that he was not allowed to address because he was an Assemblies of God pastor. The Assemblies of God, when I was growing up, didn't believe in mental health pursuit. My dad often preached against psychiatry and how you should not go to psychiatry or new age, healing stuff. And so what happened is we had a pretty significantly abusive household with this lack of mental health mixed with this very rigid Christian evangelical fundamentalist theology. And then mix in a little end times, like where if you do something wrong, not only is your dad going to rage out against you, but God is going to leave you behind, and you're going to have to get 666 put on your head, or starve to death, or get your head chopped up,
or just die and go to hell.
Or just die and go to hell. All of the above.
Yeah.
And so I've just thought, and it is distressing to some of my family members, and I do feel that, but I just feel like it could be helpful to kind of process it real time. And so I'll share a couple of things. You guys can ask me anything. I know you guys have experienced this in your own life, Jeremy and April, and so I'd love to hear your stories too. But just really the one thing I want to tell people in the middle of this is, like, your journey is your journey. I just want to tell every Christian, let people have their you get a lot of advice from people. Part of the advice I got from very well-meaning people who love me a lot was, you've got to go see your dad before he passes away. You've got to go see him. And because of the complications of our relationship, that just wasn't something that I felt like I could do. I just didn't. I literally felt sick to my stomach at the idea of doing it. And so then, of course, that brings great shame. Like, oh, maybe I'm a terrible son, which has been my belief of myself for my whole life. And in the process, I've struggled to think about, am I sad that my father has passed away? Yes, but there's also this relief mixed in with it because of the way our relationship has gone in my life, and the many times my dad texted me I was going to hell, or I was listening to Satan, and these kind of things. And so I just feel like it's okay, people, to have your journey, and it's okay to say, I feel what I feel. And if I don't feel sad, if I feel a little bit relieved, that's really human and natural, I think. Yeah. And so you get to do that. And the one other thing I'll say, and then I'll let you guys jump in as well, is you get to be angry too. Like, anger is an emotion that we were never allowed to have in our household. Only dad was allowed to be angry. Everybody else had to keep it in at all times. And so maybe the most important thing of all particularly if you had a bit of a traumatic childhood or a very traumatic childhood, is you get to be pissed off about that. And it's actually a very important thing. The therapist I'm working with says you have to understand that trauma happened. It happened to you. It was wrong, and it wasn't your fault. It shouldn't have happened to you. And so when you start to realize those things, it starts to bring a lot of anger. And a lot of what Christianity tells us in this season is like, just give it to Jesus. Just take it to the cross. Just read your Bible. And our goal is to get you through the process of grieving as quickly as possible, mostly because I believe we just don't deal well with raw emotion. So let's get to the joy. Yeah. Let's get to the graciousness on the other side. Let's have grace for the deceased. And I want to say to everybody, I'm on this journey. I am at none of those places yet. And I think it's okay. And I'm going to let myself have that journey. So anyway, I just really wanted to share that as I'm sort of processing this through real time.
Yeah, well, I think there's also this, not just in Christian culture, but just in society, there's this idea that like once someone dies, you don't talk bad about them anymore. There's something about memorializing someone that it erases whatever bad they've done because, I don't know, they're not here to defend themselves. I don't know what the rationale is, but there is this like societal pressure of like, you don't talk ill of the dead. But there are some people who are dead who did really tragic, awful things. And it can be hard, especially, if you've been on the receiving end of some not so good things, to just suddenly forget that now that that person's gone.
Mm-hmm. And I think what we struggle with in Christianity is dealing with the complexity of human beings, and that I can have grace and forgiveness for my dad. I mean, I get it. We had this greatest generation that was like, we beat the Germans and we beat the J word that I won't say, the put down of Japanese people. And, and you always hear like my dad would always say, well, my dad never told me he loved me, but I knew that he did. It was that whole thing passed down from parents of like, just buck up, little trooper, and be tough. And I think it passed down into the boomers that they improved that somewhat as parents, but still struggled with that. And so then you start to struggle with having these real emotions to be able to give safety, value, and purpose to your kids when you didn't get it from your parents. And so I have great grace for my dad through that, but also anger that he could have made different choices for his well-being, and anger that our religious system kept him from doing it. That the Assemblies of God. And I have people tell me like, Paul, are you speaking out of anger? And I'm like, yes, I'm very angry at the Assemblies of God. Jesus was very angry at the church. Jesus 3 times admonished his mother like, hey, stop it. I'm supposed to be in the temple doing my Father's business. And that didn't invalidate his message. And me being angry doesn't invalidate mine. I do keep testing my heart in it, but so I can have grace and forgiveness for my dad, and being brutally honest to the fact that what he did was very painful and put a big imprint of injury on my life.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's grief in general is just very complicated, and and in evangelical circles, like I know I lost my dad over a decade ago now, and during that time I was still very evangelical, and I had a good relationship with my dad, so it was different. And I was really believing for my dad's healing. Like I just knew that my dad would be healed, and we were Pentecostal and believed in healing and the gifts and all of that. And my dad was diagnosed stage 4 lung cancer, non-smoker, so it was rare form, and then 4 months later died. And I remember it almost became like a circus show because my dad was in and out of the hospital for this whole 4 months. And I will say one thing that at the time was really encouraging to me about the church was we started hearing from people that we hadn't heard from in years, suddenly wanting to come in, like people that even lived in the same city as us. Because my dad was an evangelist, so all over the world, but also people locally that suddenly were showing up to want to come to the hospital and like lay hands on my dad. And it started to feel really icky. It was like they wanted to be the one that said the healing prayer that got, that gave God the glory, quote unquote, but really they wanted it. Like, it was really bizarre how many people reached out to do that. And we finally started turning people away because we were tired and we just wanted, to be with my dad and just to have some family time. Like, we were also praying. And I remember one guy like chewed my mom out when she gently said no to him. And he basically said like, oh, well, he's not going to be healed because he's out of God's will. Like, you're not letting me pray for him. Just like really toxic stuff. And then when my dad finally did die, all those people who showed up to pray, they sent flowers for the funeral, but completely vanished. The one guy told my mom, well, I told you he died because he was out of God's will. Or someone else said like we had unresolved sin. Someone said like, we just didn't have enough faith. We just didn't have enough faith. And then all the typical toxic positivity of like, oh, well, it's all part of God's plan. Like, look at all the good that's coming out of this. And like, God's going to use this for his glory. Like, God, look, think of all the time that you did get, and just like trying to put this really positive spin on it. And I remember being very confused and I went along with it because at the time I was like, yeah. Oh, and the worst one was saying that I was like, yeah, but God didn't answer my prayer, this was really the beginning of my deconstruction, because I had always been taught like, as long as you have enough faith, God's going to answer your prayer. And not only did I have it, like, I knew my dad was going to be healed, and so did hundreds of other people. And then for God to not answer that prayer when I just knew that's what God was going to do, I started having lots of questions. And there were Christians that told me when I would say like, yeah, it's been really hard, because God didn't answer my prayer. I don't know why God didn't heal my dad. And they'd be like, God did heal your dad. He got the ultimate healing in heaven. Yeah. And I remember being so
I hate that.
So many people would say that, like, he did get his healing. And I'm like, that's not what I prayed for. That is the shittiest loophole, if that counted.
Jeremy, I don't know if you want to jump in. I want to make sure you have space to chat in this too.
No, I am super grateful for both of you sharing some very intimate things with me and with our family tonight here on Evangelicalish. So I am listening because I'm interested and thankful to hear your stories and learning from them. And so I'm just trying to give space. I'm just trying to be just thankful along with everybody else. So I do think that there is a lot of toxic positivity inside the church. I think there's just toxicity around the whole idea of healing in the first place. And so, I think that's a major problem. Paul, I do want to hop back to something for a sec. Well, and actually this applies to both stories. I think that there is something about, and I didn't have anybody in my family that were pastors before me. So I'm the first one, and I experience it in real time. This expectation to have it all together, right? That your spirituality, that your maturity, that your emotional state, all of those things a lot of people expect you to supersede or to be the leader, which what they see as leader, or what our culture has defined as leader, is have it all together. Right.
Right.
Whereas I would redefine that as the first person saying that they need help in walking that journey with other people. Like I think so, to encourage you, Paul, I think you're pastoring in an amazing way through this season by letting people walk through this with you. Because I think that we need more pastors who are open and honest and raw, and I've screwed up, I've messed up, or not that you've messed up in this situation, but just in general. Right.
I am a jumble of emotions. It actually takes a whole lot of energy to do this. So yes, I am very screwed up in all of this. I'm really well trained at holding it together and looking good in it from my pastoral days and from just having to maintain through a life of trauma. But no, you're right on. There is nothing perfect about this. And that's why I said, I think it would be good to do this kind of publicly in real time to let people be a part of that jumble of emotions,
Yeah. Well, and so, hearing this story about both of your dads who did ministry, and that pressure that I'm sure that they felt of like, that their outward appearance had to have it all together. Therefore, Paul, your dad didn't get the help that he probably needed in form of counseling or whatever the case was to be a better father. Because because the church was first and because his personal, facade came first in that process. And, April, I can't imagine the pressure that your dad felt of like all these people who, must have been his friends who were praying for his healing. And then how he must have felt like he was disappointing them in the process of, like I can only imagine like that feeling that he felt that guilt or that frustration.
I don't mean to jump in there, Jeremy, but it did stir something in me of like, we have this definition of a deacon or an elder in the Bible, and it's, husband of one wife and your children are in order. It talks about this orderly household idea that became in our household like defending dad's reputation was everything. Everything. We were not allowed to do anything that would disrupt dad's reputation, because in the Assemblies of God, where I was growing up, and I'm sure in other denominations as well, it would have been the end of his career as a pastor. You were not allowed to say, there's something very negative going on in my household and I need help. And so protecting that reputation that dad was, and then mix in a good toxic masculinity and complementarianism, and he's got to be the head of the church and the head of the household, and the kids have to be well behaved and dressed well, and it became, it's a mega toxic concoction that people are forced to live with.
That's ultimately what I was getting at in the question that I wanted to ask both of you. And I'm sorry, I think I took the long way around it, but yeah, I was just trying to kind of formulate my thoughts because I think there's a lot being processed here, but how much of this, that y'all have experienced through your stories, and, how much of that mentality is causing the problems that we are seeing in church after church after church today, where this abuse and misogyny and, all of the things that are just running rampant, how much of it is stemming from this, this like pastor worship, and you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the whole environment gives cover for abuse. Not that every pastor is abusive, but it's certainly, I feel like it's either going to lead to abusive types or types that have so much pressure on them to be perfect that they're like dying on the inside, but they have no one to talk to about it. Yes. I was a preacher's kid. My dad was a pastor. My grandfather was a pastor. So it was generational. And I feel like I care way too much about what other people think about me, like going out in public, which, by my TikTok, you would think I don't care, which I have to fight it. I do fight it. I think I'm doing okay at it. But like, there's some things that I've always like, for instance, one time it was always about how it would appear, whether or not we actually thought what we were doing was wrong. Like, as simple as choosing this movie theater over this other one because that one's close to the church and some people might see us go in there, and that wouldn't be a good look for a pastor's family.
Oof. Well, of course, we weren't allowed to go to theaters at all. You couldn't go to any movies ever, because what if Jesus came back while you were in the theater? And I think we're going to talk about the Hillsong documentary here as well. One other thing I would like to interject for me, and this is really a me thing of where my theology is today, that really gives me hope in this season with my dad's passing, is I do believe there is a commingling of like our spirit here in this finite space on earth with the spirit of heaven. And like I would say, Paul said in the New Testament, we are seated with Christ in heavenly realms. And so I think of death even more so than when I was a Christian, where death was an end and then you're going into eternity. I look much more as death as a transition rather than an end. And I also believe there's a justice in that transition. So I believe when we die, there is sort of a purifying fire experience that maybe we could call hellish, where we become aware of what we did with our deeds on earth. And again, this is my own theology of sort of the end of life. And so my imagination is my father has more awareness of things that he had to avoid thinking about while he was on earth, and gets purified of that. And so I'm actually sitting in anticipation. And I know for my Christian friends, it's going to be like, no, we don't talk to the dead, but I think I'm going to get to have a conversation with my father now through the spirit, through kind of a spiritual connection. And we're going to get to have a really good conversation where he is very aware and able to be present to what happened between us in this life, and we'll be able to talk that through. So, if I can just offer that as a hope to people, I'm a Christian pastor who truly believes like we get to have conversation in the spirit world with one another, with heaven, and even with those who have gone on before. And it can be a really healing experience. And so that's really my expectation in this season. I don't know what you guys think about that. Is that weird? Is that necromancy? Is that witchcraft? Is that sin? How do you guys see that?
I don't know. I don't know what I think anymore. You know what I mean? Like
what is life?
Yeah. Yeah. As the great philosopher Little John once said, what? So I don't know. I mean, I hope that there is some kind of closure in that way for you, Paul. I don't know.
I've definitely had moments where I talk to my dad out loud, and it felt like there was some kind of connection. I have no idea if there was or not, but regardless, it was healing for me. So I don't, why not?
Yeah. And I'm willing to say that could all be something that just happens in here. That isn't really something out there. And if that is healing to someone, I'm totally on board with that. But it's funny because we were always taught, seances, demons or Ouija boards or all of those, the tarot cards, and, to fear all these things because you can't talk to the dead. And then I would read the Bible and go, wait, Jesus, didn't he hang out with like Moses and Elijah on the Mount of Transfiguration? And I know Saul wasn't supposed to like conjure up Samuel, but he did. Samuel talked to Saul from the grave. So we sort of have that precedent in the Bible. And to me, it gives hope of like justice and hope of a chance for reconciliation, not in the sweet by and by way out there somewhere that I have to just sort of say, well, I have grace because Jesus has taken care of it, but I can actually, be able to have a true reconciliation that says, hey, do you recognize this wasn't good and you hurt me? Which is really, honestly, all I ever wanted to hear from my dad. I never really demanded that my dad like go through each incident of our lives and say, I'm sorry for that. All I ever wanted to hear him say was, I recognize that you're hurting and that matters to me. But again, because of the unhealthiness and the need to defend himself, he could never even come to that place to say, wow, I'm hurting that my son is hurting. And so I really want us to be able to look at the rawness of human beings and there is some of that theology of the hatred of humanity in Christianity that I think humanity's beautiful, even in our flaws. And if we could just get that, then we could start working through the shit with one another, get all the shit out on the table and not be ashamed of our shit. And maybe we would stop perpetuating the shit onto one another, you know? So,
well, I think too, in evangelical spaces, you're taught that your humanity is evil, you know, to die to your flesh daily. And it's this constant struggle of like, you know, if you have a thought, is that God or is that Satan? You know, is that my evil flesh? So it's very unnatural for, you know, for a lot of us who did grow up in the church to really allow ourselves to feel all of our human emotions, which I believe are 100% given to us by our Creator. And there's nothing wrong with feeling what you feel. So that's something that I've been trying to allow myself to. It's just like, it's okay to be angry. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to even be bitter. Like you're allowed, like as long as like everything in moderation, right?
well, the psalmist was pretty bitter, you know.
Yeah.
The psalmist was like, "Hey, this really effing sucks, God," you know.
Yeah.
And then they would clean up the writing for the biblical part of it. But you know, I think really hitting raw emotion is a really healing, profound place.
And I think it's okay to show that raw emotion like in your prayer time. And it's okay to be angry with God. Like that was a huge pill to swallow for me. Like after my dad died, I was like kind of pretending that God and I were cool, and like I was like, thanks God so much. Like you're like I had bought into all of the toxic positivity, and I was like really like white knuckling, holding on to it. And I remember I had a theology professor at a Christian school, and he was a little more progressive. And I thank God for him to this day, because he was a breakthrough for me in my grief journey. Because I just went to him and I was like, I'm not hearing from God. I was like, God is completely silent. I've never read my Bible more. I've never prayed more. I've never like I'm going to church all of the time. I want to hear something from God and I hear nothing. And he looked at me and he was like, you know, I think if I were you, I would be really angry with God. And I like recoiled. I was like, no, I could never be angry with God. And he was like, are you sure? And then it was like this realization. I was like, oh my gosh, I am so pissed at God. And it like was a complete breakthrough, because then I had just this really come to Jesus, like literally moment where I just completely told God off. And then it was just so much, there's just a lot of healing in that, and just being able to say, yeah, I'm pissed at God.
I think it's really helpful to say, God, this sucks at the moment. And particularly for people who have experienced childhood trauma, it's a very legitimate question to say, why would an omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent God have allowed those things to happen to me? I think it's a very legitimate question that I actually don't have the answer to yet. Because a friend of mine made this statement the other day, and it really blew me away. He said, God can be omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, and can allow humans to do bad things to one another. But he can't be good. He can't be all those things at the same time and be good. And I was like, whoa, that can't be right, because we know God is good. He's like, no, if God can stop a young child from experiencing SA and says, I'm not going to do it for a good purpose, I struggle with thinking of that being as a good father.
Yeah.
Would any of us say that's a good father who says, I'm going to allow that to happen to my child for a good purpose? I really struggle with that and think something's off in the story.
Yep. No, I get that. And that's why we're all here, deconstructing.
Somebody Jeremy, give us the right answer to all of that and fix our theology so we can be okay.
I don't have it. You know,
or we could just sing, I got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart. And
no, we just got to believe harder.
Yeah. Yeah. I just think the toxicity of the teaching of the American evangelical church and really just kind of Western Christianity as a whole. I think I think we are just building systems of abuse and harm. It is unbelievable. And we continue to just build up the same thing and see the same fall. And all of us go, like we're shocked. I mean, we have a laundry list of megachurch pastors who have been unfaithful with the money at the church, unfaithful with their spouse, unfaithful with, their friends or, whatever the case is, and just on and on and on and on. And there is a list of those guys that is growing constantly. It's because we continue to build the exact same system. And then we're all shocked when we get the exact same result. And I think there are so many things that go into that. Because I have felt not so much now. I have a lot of freedom in what I do now, which is also bringing up some harmful things. There are harder days now, even though there's more freedom, there are harder days now because I'm realizing some of the pain that I've walked through. But there is, I have felt that frustration of, living in the glass house and everybody's looking at every move you make and everything you say and everything you do. And so if you ever felt uncomfortable or ever felt depressed or ever felt anxious, I suppressed anxiety and depression for years, to the point where, I almost committed suicide because, because I was in so much pain, but I was just told that I wasn't praying hard enough. And I didn't want people to think I didn't have it all together. So this is how you end up with a 9mm standing at the edge of the lake. That is how that happens, because pastors are told you have to have it all together. And so the only other way to swing the pendulum to the other side is to just go in full bore, act like, and just become almost complete narcissist and act like you have everything together and you just live a double life.
Yeah.
You fulfill all the holes while nobody's looking, and then you pretend like you have it all together when the lights are on. And so I see how pastors can tumble off into major issues. Because of this system that we have continued to build over and over and over again. And every time it fails, every time it falls apart, every time another pastor comes up short, we go, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. I wouldn't have ever thought it was, so-and-so.
You're muted, Paul.
Yeah.
Sorry. We have another documentary out talking about that exact thing. So why don't we hit our mid-roll and we'll come back and talk a little Hillsong and piggyback upon what Jeremy's saying there and how we perpetuate this system inside the church.
Evangelical-ish? Follow us to catch all the latest content and encouragement. You can check us out on TikTok by following @Evangelical-ish or subscribe on YouTube by searching Evangelical-ish. That's Evangelical with an ISH. And don't forget to catch our live streams each and every single Wednesday night on YouTube at 9 Eastern, 8 Central, and 6 Pacific. And now, back to the Evangelical-ish podcast.
That is a Discovery Plus documentary that has come out about Hillsong and talking about how there's been a lot of abuse inside the church system, and a lot of it covered up, including molestation of young boys. And I apologize if this is triggering and difficult for anybody, by Frank Johnson, the founder of the church and the father of Frank Houston,
yeah.
The father of Brian Houston, who grew Hillsong into a big worldwide phenomenon, and delves into Carl Lentz, who had to step down because this big purity culture pastor was having an affair while he was shaming everybody in his church for their their sexuality and things. And so I think, Jeremy, you really started us on the track there of why does this keep happening? I mean, we've talked, this is going to be like our third week in a row now of talking about church cover-ups, and we have the Roy's report and these other people who are out there now saying, hey guys, there is a problem here. And one of the things I made a video about yesterday was the danger is we start saying, oh, good, Brian Houston resigned, so now it's all going to be okay. But Brian Houston is not even close to being a one-off. This is a problem that's permeating the church on an ongoing basis. And we really have to start thinking about how do we resolve this? So I don't know. We all just went through rise and fall of Mars Hill, which was really painful. There's a lot of other talk about other churches, Ravi Zacharias. What are we feeling about all of this that just keeps coming up, particularly in evangelical circles? And how do we start to deal with it and see this change going forward? You guys have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think because people have started to speak out and the first couple have come to light, more people are feeling comfortable to speak out. So that's good. And I think sadly we'll be seeing more and more of this. But I think one thing that needs to happen, which I don't know that this will happen in evangelical culture, because it does seem like most of the exposing is coming from outside, people that have left. Like there's very minimal whistleblowers. It's mostly people that have left that are saying it. Is that we've got to get rid of that verse that everyone uses that's like, don't touch God's anointed when it comes to men, especially in positions of power in the church, whether they're deacons or just associate pastors, some type of minister. Like I've heard that before. I knew of pastors who had affairs, and churches that like personally know of affairs that happened that was swept under the rug. And they didn't want people talking about it and exposing it because you don't want to touch God's anointed. One, because God's going to hurt you, I guess, because you touched God's anointed. But then two, it'll make people lose their faith. But I think what we're seeing is that not exposing it and covering up for it is actually what's making people leave the church.
Yeah. Well, and the question that I have, that I don't even want to say out loud, but the concern that I find myself constantly with is we see, these documentaries or podcasts of, mega churches, right? We hear about the disgusting things that happened in Ravi Zacharias's ministry. We hear about the disgusting comments that, Franklin Graham made to, Pastor Saeed's wife when she was talking about being physically and sexually abused by him. We hear about the misogyny and the toxicity and the, hyper masculinity and toxic masculinity of Mark Driscoll and then now the, Brian Houston, Carl Lentz. But the problem is this. We are hearing about those things, and I don't want to minimize any of it because they are bad on a giant scale. But we hear about it because those are big churches, big ministries, culture shakers. This was Justin Bieber's pastor and his church. Right. Mars Hill was this 20,000, 30,000 person church, whatever, Ravi Zacharias, books on books and, all over the world. If it's happening at such a great rate on the big scale, then what is happening in the tiny church down the corner from your street?
Wow. Yeah.
From your house and how many of those churches? So my concern is now it has gone from I think it's been like the train wreck we couldn't look away from, right? Especially like as we went through the Mars Hill thing, like, oh my gosh, this is, whoa,
Yeah.
Now I'm just super burdened for the children in these churches, the women in these churches, the men who are being abused in these churches. Like, let's not pretend like there aren't men also being abused in these situations. And how widespread is this? And I guess I've come to a place where I have to know. And it's a thing where I guess at the end of the day, for me, it's why we have said so often, in April, you reminded me of this yesterday, but it's why we have started to say, at least as far as this church in America is concerned and this version of Christianity or whatever, gasoline, not water.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, because the roots are just rotten.
Yeah, you will never get good fruit out of this again.
Yeah, and it's that theology and now we have one of the things from Hillsong is this idea of seven mountains theology. I don't know how familiar you guys are with seven mountains, the idea of the seven mountains, but it's big in the lineage of Christianity that I grew up in and certainly was a leader in. And it's the idea that Christianity needs to take charge of the seven spheres of culture. And I don't remember them all, but it's, Christians need to take over government. They need to take over education. They need to take over the arts and cinema. The idea is if Christians are in charge, things will be good. And my wife and I live in what is a very Christian city in the middle of California. And we kept looking around saying, the churches were like, yes, we got another Christian mayor elected. Aren't we amazing? And we're like, yes. And our town is shit. So congratulations. But the seven mountains, Brian Houston has this clip where I got to pray with the president of the United States today. And I'm in the White House. And these people become so powerful and so important that they have to be protected at all costs. And the cost is our children and our women and our men, as you say, Jeremy. It creates a cycle and an atmosphere of secrecy that perpetuates what's going on, again, rather than providing the messiness that gives us the opportunity to deal with real human beings. And so I'm kind of in the same place. I don't know if it's beyond repair at this point. And the worship of Donald Trump has only really tore the lid off of everything and said, hey, we really do like terrible men to be in charge so we can have power and take the seven mountains.
Well, it's Christian supremacy that I think is a subset or wrapped up in white supremacy.
Yep.
And they're intertwined, especially here in America. It's connected with colonialism and just this desire to not just exist, but to take over. And you see it happening today with the Florida Don't Say Gay bill, with all the anti-trans laws that are being passed in GOP senates across the country, with abortion laws. They're not just living in their beliefs. They are trying to impose those beliefs on everybody. And the cognitive dissonance that they have to look trans people, just speak to all LGBTQ people and say, you do not exist. Transgenderism is a disease, or it's fake. It's not real. It's a mental illness, whatever bigoted thing that they say in their ignorance. And then if someone pushes back and say, you're being a bigot, then they claim persecution. And
I'm not being a bigot. You're being a bigot.
Right. And then they're saying, well, they're saying you're being intolerant of my beliefs because your freaking beliefs are trying to take their rights away. It's so maddening. It pisses me off. It also pisses me off because I used to be like that. So I see myself in that. And I just kind of want to punch my old self in the face. That's the only time you'll ever hear me say I'm going to punch someone. I would just punch my old self, me.
You can't call yourself persecuted if you're being an asshole.
Right.
Yeah, it's just not a thing. And that's been the biggest issue, but it stems from this, we have it all right. We have it all together. And and it comes from that toxic culture of like what we were alluding to earlier. Like everybody comes into church and their families dressed to the nines and oh brother, I'm so good in the Lord. Oh my goodness, the Lord has blessed me and my family, and especially in this prosperity gospel culture where it's like, you even hear freaking Kenneth Copeland, like, as they're getting ready to pass the buckets at his rallies, he's always like, now I'm going to give you a chance to raise your household income. Like put money in this bucket and you're going to, whatever. And it's just, everything's good. Everything's fine. Everybody's okay. It's our way or the highway because God has blessed us so much. And so nobody talks about their mistakes. Nobody talks about their shortcomings. Nobody talks about the places they need help or places that they're failing, because then the rest of the church would look at them and think, oh, you're out of God's will. You're sinning, like a lot of what you had experienced in your story that you shared at the beginning, April. It breeds out of that of like, well, we have to have it all together. And then now we're all going to march ahead and we're just going to, we're going to force everybody else to have it all together like we do. And so it is absolutely maddening. It's negative, and it has gone from hurting, I don't even know how I want to say this. It is causing so much trauma, like just at its core.
Yeah.
They don't realize how harmful the things that they say actually are. That like it just makes me so mad. And I know this is a horse that we have beat to death. Or the horse was dead and we've beat the horse. We didn't kill a horse. But just like the high rates of suicide among LGBTQ kids, especially trans kids, and the fact that they just don't care.
Yeah.
Because it goes against their beliefs. They will choose dogma over people every time, despite the fact that Christ did the exact opposite of that.
Yeah. Anytime anybody does some version of hate the sin, love the sinner on any of my social media, I immediately respond back. Do you get that basically every time Jesus was talking about somebody who would not inherit the kingdom of heaven, he was talking about religious people with belief systems like yours.
Yeah.
He was talking about you, not about the trans, the gay, you name it, marginalized person. He was talking about, and we just don't get that our religion looks a lot more like that one that Jesus condemned than the people he sat with. One thing that I'm encouraging people to do in this season, and you really, you've got to determine if you can or cannot do this safely in your environment. But I'm asking pastor friends of mine, do you have a policy for handling accusations of abuse? You need a policy ahead of time that will help protect you. Policies like that aren't to punish the leadership of a church. They're to protect the leadership, to say, if an abuse accusation comes against a coworker of mine who's my friend, policy protects me from saying, well, I'm not going to bring this accusation against my friend, but instead says, I have no choice but to follow this policy to make sure everyone is safe, including my friend who's being accused, but to very much make sure that I'm not going to blame the victim first and force the victim to prove something. And eventually, what we do too often is we send the victim back to their abuser and say, make it right. So I'm just encouraging everybody, reach out. If you're in a church, reach out to your leadership and just say, do we have a policy? I'm not accusing you of anything. I just want to make sure that we're in a space where we'll handle this well if it ever comes towards, comes to the leadership of the church. And I think every church ought to have it posted on their website and tell people what to do if they've experienced it, who to go to, and how to handle it, because let's shine light on this stuff so the church isn't the place where we continue to see this come to light.
Yeah. No, that's like something very practical that we could do. I mean, I have zero plans to go back to a church anytime soon, unless they're fully affirming, which is hard in a very conservative redneck town. So,
I mean, Jeremy, when you were pastoring, did you guys ever talk about what happens if somebody brings an accusation to you?
Yeah, and you know, the communities that I lead now, we've been very proactive in that process. You know, my lead teams know not to, you know, no matter who comes with what accusation, those things immediately go up the chain, and especially in the places where I'm in charge, they come to me directly. And my practice is, you know, I'm gonna let law enforcement figure it out, because you know, listen, if I didn't do that, nothing ever happened, okay, then you have nothing to hide. Cooperate with the police.
yeah.
You know, because at the end of the day, you know, I would rather have somebody end up having a hard time having to tell police that, you know, they got an ex-girlfriend mad at them, or, you know, something like that, and figuring that out that way, than I would get stuck with, you know, covering for any type of abuser. So,
yeah. Oh, and by the way, Christianity Today outed itself for abuse.
Yeah, self-reported.
Yep. And the Mars Hill podcast has added a new episode to talk about it, because that was a Christianity Today production. And kudos to them. They're like, hey, we called this out in Mars Hill. We need to talk about what happened inside our own walls. So, you know, kudos to them.
Can I just say, just as a sidebar, that I have not watched the Hillsong documentary yet. It's one of those things where I want to watch it, but I also don't want to watch it, because I'm already mad. You know, like I don't need to be more mad. And so I find myself kind of in this space, and I don't know if anyone here can relate, of like, sometimes I'm just tired of the fight. Like it's a very noble fight, but I also feel like I need to make space for my own mental health, to just, like, I have this freedom now because I'm not in the church, and for obviously we do this podcast, like we are actively doing stuff to expose things, which I think is needed and necessary, and I'm glad more and more people are speaking out. But I also think it's important to take breaks and to,
good idea,
you know, and to just like know, like, you know, there's moments where I'm like, we've got to change it now, but knowing, like, you know, I'm one person, like together, yes, we can make change, but just giving yourself the space to be like, I know I should watch that documentary because everyone's telling me to watch it, but I don't have the mental capacity to be angrier about something at the moment.
I 1,000% resonate with that. And actually, I think I even told y'all a couple of weeks ago, I was like, guys, I'm just tired. Like this is getting insane. And I think part of that is, as each one of us kind of journey through some of the things in our own lives, you know, which some of it we've shared, some of it we haven't. And not that we would ever hide anything from anyone, but some of those things we're just not ready to share publicly yet. You know, I know, just speaking for myself, like I can't speak for anybody else, but like for me, you know, there are things that, you know, like I shared with y'all today that I have just discovered for myself. And I'm not sure if I'm ready to, you know, put all those things out there. So I think there is a lot of fatigue with that, especially when you're kind of on the front lines, so to speak, because we do catch flack from a lot of different directions. And, you know, it was the same reason that I was slow to get to the Mars Hill podcast. Like I was 5 or 6 episodes in before I actually started listening to it, just because I was like, I can't hear this right now. Like, you know, and I needed time. And then I eventually got into it, and I waited a while before I watched the Hillsong one. Fortunately, it was short enough. It's like 3 hours total, I think. And so, you know, I watched like part of it last night and part of it this morning after I dropped the kids off for school. And it was in relativity, like I'll share this conversation that we had pre-show was, you know, Paul and I both were like, well, it's not as bad as some of the other ones that we've seen. And then we kind of all paused, and it was like, I think we're getting to that place, which this is scary.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this goes exactly to what you're saying, April.
Yeah.
I think we're getting to that place where we are becoming numb and desensitized to so much of this, because it's like, well, it wasn't like this crazy thing that happened at, Mars Hill or at Ravi Zacharias or wherever.
Right.
And that is scary, that in the midst of it, like after we've consumed so much of it,
Right.
our reactions are either full blown anger and I can't deal with this anymore, or, well, it's not like that situation, so that is how I know that this is the rule, not the exception at this point. It's the rule, not the exception.
Yes. No, exactly. Like, I am already convinced that evangelicalism needs to die. Like, I'm there. I don't need another reason. Like, I'm convinced,
Yeah.
But it's still good. Like, I'm glad, like, I do think it's important that people keep exposing this. And I mean, more and more churches are going to fall, which I think is going to be good. Like, I actually think this could bring apart the quote unquote revival that I've heard about my entire life that's going to come. And I think it's just people leaving the church and living out a more authentic faith than staying in the prison that is evangelicalism, because you're not allowed to be different. You need to be a cookie cutter version of everybody else and only veer off the path ever so slightly or get heavily judged or blacklisted.
I think what we're going to see happen is that communities like this one, with open ideas about faith and love and good conversation, are going to start to lead that journey into a new understanding of what being a Jesus follower looks like.
Yeah.
And so, I know Paul does a fantastic job with his Sunday community. I try to do well by mine. We meet with people from all over the country online. I honestly believe that is what the new church will look like, is just these folks coming together and a bunch of people, including the pastor or the leader or the whoever, saying, guys, I don't have it all together, but let's talk about it together. Let's challenge each other together. Let's have, and this is the phrase I've just been using constantly, let's have good grace and good conversations. Good grace and good conversations for each other.
I do want to address something that's in the comments here from a commenter named Berean Babes. And that person is asking, shouldn't a pastor deal with the issue rather than calling the police? Aren't you abdicating your pastoral duties? And what if the accusation is a lie? Fair questions. I think we have to wait. For one, the law is, for me as a pastor, the law and my insurance liability carrier told us all the time that if somebody comes and says they're committing a crime, they're going to injure somebody else or themselves, then I was required by law to immediately pick up the phone and make a call and say.
And aren't we? I understand that's by law based on that. And not to cut you off, Paul, but aren't we just shouldn't we find ourselves morally liable to allow the authorities to investigate? Because there are too many damn victims. There are too many victims. And if it turns out to be false, then you deal with that in a case-by-case basis as well.
Yep.
Right? Like maybe somebody needs to be asked to leave the congregation because they are bringing false accusations against people. That's okay. But guess what? At the end of the day, I'm going to side with the people who are saying they're being abused. And I would much, 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 much rather err on the side of caution in that sense than I ever, ever, ever would get caught in a situation where I have covered up for an abuser. I absolutely will not do it. I will not be a part of it. So you can take that question somewhere else, because that one doesn't fly with me. I'm sorry, but my pastoral duties is to take care of the sheep. And the best way to take care of the sheep is if somebody comes to me and says that they have been abused mentally, physically, sexually, spiritually, then we must smoke it out. And if it's physical, emotional, or sexual, then it must go to the authorities, point blank, period. And it must get vetted. and let them vet it. That is their job. That is what they're best at. So I'm going to allow them to vet it. I'm going to allow them to look at it. And guess what? If it was a false report, it was a false report. But 99 out of 100 times, it is absolutely not. There are women and children getting abused every single day in the American church. It cannot stand any longer. It's the rule, not the exception. So,
well, and it takes a ton of bravery to come forward and tell someone, even in private, if you are being abused. And most assault cases to this day, most are never reported.
Yeah, and I think what we've found is, through the Harvey Weinstein issues, and then so just misogyny in our culture as a whole, and then even more so in the church with its bad toxic masculinity and complementarianism theology that we immediately threw a negative light on the woman bringing an accusation, and that's just the opposite way we have to do it. If it turns out to be a false accusation, then our pastoral duties will kick in to start to figure out how we pastor
church discipline at that point, right? Like we go into church discipline. We seek wise counsel from the leaders inside of our church of how to prevent this problem to happen again. Okay, is somebody trying to ruin somebody's life or marriage? Is there a vendetta here? Okay, we can dive into all of that after we have discovered and had the authorities look to say that there is no abuse. And I saw some other comment about, I'm sorry, man, I'm going to let it go. I'm going to let it go. It's not the day, man. I'm just saying it's not the day. Like some of the stuff that I have walked through this week, just in my personal life, makes me so much more keen and so much more tuned in to what is happening, because listen, sometimes a lot of times victims are scared to death, and they're in a system that is going to oppress them even more if they come forward for the reasons that April listed. Don't touch God's anointed. We even heard it in the Hillsong documentary. You don't want to ruin this person's witness, right? Because it's gonna pull all these people away from Jesus. We need to keep this hush hush. Like, we'll deal with it internally. Enough is enough. Do you want to know how to make Jesus? You want to know how to make the name of Jesus better? Start being fucking honest. Just start being honest
and care about people.
Being up front and start caring about people.
Care about people. And let me tell you something about biblically handling this situation. Matthew 19 is a chapter that Christians use very wrongly to condemn homosexuals and transgender people, LGBTQ plus. You abuse that scripture. What Jesus is actually talking about in that passage is, hey, you MFers, your divorce laws are horrible. You guys have taken scripture and so what could happen in divorce in that culture was a man could give a certificate of divorce to his wife at any time, for any reason. And it was a big argument in their culture. If she burned her toast, was the saying, you could divorce your wife. If you found somebody better looking, you could divorce your wife.
Yeah.
And a woman who was divorced in that culture had zero value. She couldn't own land. She's a marked person now, so nobody's going to marry her. She doesn't have a dowry to use for another. And so quite often they would have to become prostitutes. And so then take this to the woman caught in adultery story. And Jesus is again standing with the woman saying, I'm going to chase you guys away because it's your system that put her in this place to begin with.
There it is.
You guys are the ones that suck here. You're the ones that are not going to inherit the kingdom of God. So don't start. I'm with you now, Jeremy. Don't start talking to me about 2 or 3 fucking witnesses.
There it is.
Biblical shit. And when Jesus was saying, you guys, you men and your religious system are the problem, not these women.
Well, and also just that line of thinking keeps real victims from coming forward. Like, I was assaulted and I never reported it. One, because there's a lot of shame wrapped around in being assaulted from a purity culture standpoint, that I felt it was my fault and that people would judge me for me being assaulted. And then 2,
and they would have, April, by the way.
exactly.
You were right.
Right. There's shame around that, even though I did not choose to, and then also the fact that there's a good chance, especially 12 years ago when I was assaulted, that I would not be believed. And there were no witnesses to the assault. It was between me and my abuser. So you would protect and believe people when they tell you that you're being abused.
And we're firing F-bombs. And I often say, I wish Christians cared as much about people as they do somebody saying fuck.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Just care about people for a fucking change and stop worrying about who's saying what word. Ooh, this is ending on a fiery note, isn't it?
Were we going to end on something fun? I don't remember what were we going to do?
Were we going to do like youth pastor theology or something like that?
We were going to have someone or have them type random things or phrases or current events in the chat, and we were going to make it a youth pastor, a quick little illustration with a stupid pun.
Well, I don't know if we're in the mood for that.
No, I think the mood is soured.
But let me say that I love that we get to have this conversation. I love, first of all, I love you guys for loving me through this moment, emotional moment in my life. That's amazing. For all of you with your, who are commenters, people in our community, what a privilege we get to have these discussions and to have them openly. And so I'm sitting here angry at this, religious mindset of things. And yes, I'm with you. The church has to come down. What a joy to live in this season where I get to meet people like you and have these discussions with the people in our comments, and something good has to come out of that in the next generation as we look forward through this. So thank you guys for letting me be a part of this with you guys.
Yeah. Well, Paul, I really appreciate you sharing some of your heart, because I know you're not even a week out of dealing with this grief.
That's right.
That's very brave as well, to just put yourself out there knowing that it's raw and you might feel differently about it tomorrow, because that's how grief is. So yeah, well, I think we could call there. Jeremy, what were you going to say?
No, I was affirming what you were saying.
Yeah.
I think it's great, and I love the fact that we can have a community with real authenticity. Just,
and I love your passion, Jeremy.
I appreciate that. I just, this was just I want to apologize to that listener, that I did get that impassioned by that, and I was trying to ignore those comments, but it's just not the right week, man. It's just not the right week. Like, I'm not really at a place where I want to share everything about that, but because I just barely got a chance to talk to my wife about some things today. But we have got to quit using Jesus jukes and Bible jargon to even accidentally give cover for abusers. Well, I handled this in a biblical way. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. Because I can't with it anymore. And I'm so raw, and I'm so done with, the hate and the abuse and the cover-ups and the lies that are spread to continue it. So, anyway, I'm super grateful. I'm super grateful for this community as well. And that we get to have these conversations, as hard as they are. Sometimes they're good, right? It's healthy, and we're moving in the
It's so refreshing though, because I rarely got to have. I definitely never had conversations like this, like in a church setting. Like, I've had one-on-one conversations with people that I found that were like me, who are now also deconstructed, that we found each other in the middle of it all. But there's something really healing about this. Like, this is church. This is.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is what a faith community should be like, is doing life together, even though it's through a screen and the three of us have never met, and we haven't personally met the people in our group and in the chat and the people that listen. But I think there's something really beautiful and wrestling with indoctrination and beliefs and a book that so many people use to beat people over the head with the Bible. I think it's so easy to make the Bible an idol and you just forget the love part.
Yeah. But to me, I mean, it's even in the Bible that Jesus got really fucking pissed off at religion and religious people. He turned over tables and then stopped, grabbed some ropes, wound them together, and started hitting people with them. That's a pretty pissed off guy. He turned to his best buddy and said, "Get behind me, Satan," once. So I think this idea of, we should just be loving and is to read the story of the Bible and miss the story of Jesus, that he was a passionate guy that and this is what I hear from you, Jeremy, so cares about people that you're going to get pretty pissed off when you start feeling like people are being abused. And I don't think that's something you have to apologize for.
Well, I think, I was just preaching about this past Sunday. Jesus at one point, he tells the disciples, he says, "I came to bring division, not peace." Right.
Sorry, I was just reading that comment.
Yeah.
Continue.
Church is the people, and they can meet any way they want. But
this is the night. We rarely get these comments.
I got sidetracked. Sorry. Sometimes you just got to hone in the theology for the friends,
Yeah.
But Jesus says he came to bring division, not peace. And I will say this: I genuinely believe that Jesus always loved everyone, but love does not always mean peace.
Yeah.
Sometimes love means discourse, and sometimes love says hard things and does hard things. And so, in this season, listen, people come into the comments on my TikTok and they come into the comments here and they think that they're just really gonna, say some things. Like my deal with that is I have lost close friends through this process. Loved ones, family members have distanced themselves from me. I've lost job opportunities. I've lost a job because of it. Do you really think your comments in this YouTube feed are really going to pause me and make me second guess everything I believe?
No. Well, have you considered this scripture? Yes, we have. We considered it all.
I keep being amazed how little Christians actually know the Bible. It's incredible. Yeah. And then they'll say, you cannot change God's word. When Hebrews says, don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together. It was illegal for Christians to meet in a building. They did not meet in buildings. Jesus had church on the side of a hill. He traveled from town to town. Don't be stupid. God doesn't like stupid. I'm sorry. He just doesn't. And bad biblical theology to try to use to come and beat people up is idiotic.
Choose people over dogma. Yeah. That's what Jesus did.
Church is saying, church is community. It is, it's the gathering of like-minded believers together, people who are seeking to be more like Jesus, followers of Jesus. That is what church is. Jesus did it in a lot of crazy places. He did it in the middle of storms on the Sea of Galilee. And like you said, on the side of a hill. Mm-hmm. Jesus had church in some crazy spots. You're telling me that people didn't think that they went to church when they walked into the graveyard and he told Lazarus to get up and walk out? Yeah. That was some church.
It was a good day of church. Friends. In a graveyard with setting a mentally incapacitated guy free. That's church.
This is not church by definition. It literally is church by
definition. The assembly of saints. Ugh.
Yeah, the assembling of yourselves together. Hi, we're followers of Jesus.
We have assembled through Zoom, which did not exist in the Bible. So technically they didn't say Zoom But if you're a literalist. Okay, I think we should go before we
I
all get
know.
fired up here. More so than we already have.
It's fun to deal with the religious zealots and get to say,
how are you going to baptize communion, church discipline? So we will.
I'll mail you a water.
Yeah,
Splash it on your face.
No, listen. We've done communion a couple of times. I know, Paul, y'all take communion as well.
Take communion every Sunday.
Yeah, every Sunday. Okay, we've done it. We've done it 3 times. We allow people to bring whatever they got available to them and enjoy it that way. Baptism. Watch Speakeasy this week. We're going to baptize somebody on Sunday.
Nice.
Online.
There you
go. So anyway, yeah.
Nice.
Listen.
Okay. Guys, this is also our last episode of this season.
We end on a high note.
So we just probably we need to pray through these next few weeks.
I forgot.
On that note.
And our friends would be very upset to know that I allow people to use Doritos.
Oh, yeah. That's what I'm saying. Whatever you got.
And I don't even ask them to be Christian to take communion with us. So I know we're
full-blown open communion.
Yes. Go ahead, April. Sorry.
Oh, I was just saying, okay, this is our last episode of the season, and we're going to take the rest of April off because we want to actually give ourselves time we're talking about doing kind of like a little bit of rebranding. We'll still be evangelical-ish, but like new logos and just trying to get more organized on, really doing some cool stuff with this and this community, this church community, if you want to call it that, going forward. And so we'll have a lot of cool things to share come May. We still definitely want to plan to have some in-person stuff. And we're going to take the next few weeks. Oh, nice.
What?
Who did that? Who blocked them?
I did.
Nice.
Give us 5 minutes of
Are
peace.
you going to pray us away?
Well, I was just going to play the closing song when you were done giving the announcements.
Oh, you want to play in my background? I can do this like a youth pastor. Can you? All right, church family. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight. I just want to remind you all that this is a church. We're your brothers and your sisters, and we have gathered here today through this Zoom community and maybe through your car or your radio, wherever you listen on your phone, to piss off evangelicals everywhere. And so we will see you back on Star Wars Day, May the 4th, Wednesday night. I don't need a lightsaber when I got this little light of mine.
Hey!
So join us. Take the month off. Go be heretics. Do whatever you want. But whatever you do, be back. Join us in May. Star Wars Day. We'll be back. 9 p.m. Eastern. I'd like our worship team to come on up and play us out.
Yeah. Your grace is enough if you're deconstructing your grace.
That's nice.
Oh my God.
Good night, everybody. We love y'all. We'll see you in a few weeks.